you examine the war memorials in Okanagan communities, you'll read name after name of the men who died in the Great War. World War I, 1914 to 1918. How can I put that sacrifice into context? It was a quarter of the population of the valley at the time. Every able-bodied man, about 6,000 of them, and 2/3 of them were killed or wounded, scarred for life, mentally and physically. Their individual contribution to the war effort is mostly lost today. 6,000 men would be like the grains of a handful of sand thrown on a beach. But when we talk about the Canadian contribution to the First World War effort, we're talking about the contribution made by soldiers from the Okanagan. On today's Okanagan Pioneers and Places, historian Howard Hisdahl tells us the story of the C Dragoons, the Okanagan Cavalry Regiment that found itself suddenly in the trenches, in the infantry, and winning battles in a new Canadian way. Welcome to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Mike Roberts with Howard Hisdahl, our storyteller for today. He is the historian for the Okanagan Military Museum, a lieutenant in the reserves, and also getting his doctoral degree so he can teach history at Okanagan University College. The story today, the origins of the C Dragoons, which started right here in the Okanagan. How far back do we have to find our first sort of military origins?
Well, the regiment officially starts in 1908 with the Okanagan Mounted Rifles, but there were four attempts to start a regiment before then, where three of them we circulated local petitions and 40 or 50 local able-bodied men would volunteer, and then we'd submit the petition to the government, and the government would just basically ignore it. The fourth time, the government wanted us to form a militia regiment, and nobody was interested. We ignored it. Ignored them. But finally, in 1908, you get the soldiers, the men who are willing to be soldiers, and you get the government that's willing to have regiment. This is post-Boer War, so the idea of having mounted rifle regiments is taken hold, and the Okanagan with the horses, the ranchers, and the orchardists who all had horses, it was a very good idea. We could get frontiersmen who could shoot and ride.
Who was the founder of the mounted rifles?
The Okanagan Mounted Rifles was founded by Major Perry, and he was a veteran of the Boer War, which was a war where they had used mounted rifles to, we'd learned it from the Boers, who were farmers who had their own horses and rode and shoot. So that was it. That was a riding and shooting type of cavalry.
Hampson, sort of a fella, big handlebar mustache. How many men under him at the beginning?
About 60 or 70 just started. It was just a squadron. It didn't become a full regiment until 1912.
And did these kind of squadrons sort of develop all over the interior?
Yes, we had squadron in Vernon. We had squadrons and troops in Lumbee and Armstrong and Merritt and Kamloops, although the Merritt and the Kamloops people eventually had their own cavalry regiment, which has since faded into history. But it's the one in the Okanagan that has survived to the present day, although we are now an armored unit.
So from about 1908 to 1914, it was just all for fun, really?
Really, it was a riding club. It was a bunch of able-bodied men who wanted to get together and get out and ride and get off the ranch and get out of the orchard.
Look at these guys with their sabers. Well, that's sort of saber drill, is that? Is that what they're learning?
Yes, and it was pretty much recognized as obsolete at the time, and they also did wrestling on horseback as well, but it was good fun. They enjoyed it. They realized that for real warfare they would have to get off their horses and fire the rifles, but the horses would just be for transport into battle.
As things got more serious, as 1914 approached and Germany was tooling up, Britain was tooling up, everybody knew there was going to be a war, it became more serious.
Yes, much more serious. It wasn't just the Okanagan Mounted Rifles. The Okanagan Mounted Rifles at this time are now the 30th British Columbia Horse, but we have the Rocky Mountain Rangers, which is an infantry unit, and they're in the valley as well, and they're in the panoramic shots we have here.
This panoramic shot was actually taken what year at the Vernon Army Camp?
About 1915, the really big panoramic shot here, and it's about 6,000 soldiers assembled in Vernon. The Vernon City Fathers had been supporting militia camps for years before the war, and pretty much every able-bodied man who was able to go. Now, this is the second contingent. The first contingent already suffered poison gas. These people, the flush of war is off now. They're grimly determined that we are going to win.
So the 6,000 people in that photograph, plus the others who went over in the first contingent, would total what? About how many men would come out of the interior of BC?
From the interior of British Columbia, maybe about 10, 20,000, 24,000 total from the whole province. And a lot of them would be frontiersmen, the type of men that were really needed in the warfare to bring in new ideas.
They head overseas. They do a little training in Vernon. They do some more training in England.
Yeah.
This photo album here actually is kind of neat because this guy, he was obviously going to chronicle his entire war career in a nice little handsome little diary.
Yes, yes. We have a Trooper Gilling there, and it's a typical sort of war diary. He's got lots of shots of training in Vernon, got shots of training over in the Willow Camp in Victoria by the fairgrounds. And he has shots of training in England with the horses. They still had horses in England. And finally, though, he gets over to France, and the shots pretty much end in 1916 when he gets wounded and recovers and becomes a postal clerk for the rest of the war. And that's the end of the diary, really. He's out of it.
That's when everybody's sense of humor kind of ended for this thing.
Yes, it did. I've read letters from soldiers at the front. Initially, they're very enthusiastic. But by about the end of 1916 into 1917, they're very proud of some of the battles, but they're writing saying, don't let my younger brother join. The family's done enough.
Let's take a break here. We'll come back in just a moment because the names like Passchendaele, the Somme, Vimy, all of these really are the baptism of fire of Canadians. We're going to talk about those when we come back from this break. Welcome back to Okanagan Pioneers and Places. Howard Hisdall telling us the story of the BC Dragoons in those days. Of course, it was now called what?
By this time, they're called the 2nd Canadian Mounted Rifles. They've gone from Okanagan to British Columbia Mounted Rifles, and now they're Canadian Mounted Rifles because the reinforcements now are going to come from all over Canada.
The spurs that I'm holding actually didn't last long once they got to Europe.
No, by the time they got to France, they realized they were going to be fed into the trenches, trench warfare. So the soldiers of the regiment held a burial, and they buried their spurs.
Buried their spurs.
Yes.
Canadians were sent overseas with a very wonderful weapon that just never worked. We've got an example of it right here.
First we have a photograph of Sam Hughes, who
Hughes,
the Minister of National Defense, and he liked rifles and he liked marksmanship training. And he loved this rifle, the Ross rifle, and it was rather unique in that it has straight pullback action like that. Yeah. Okay, so it could be used
instead of the cock up, pullback.
It actually works like an artillery piece. It rotates. Now, this was a very good rifle at the Bisley Rifle Competition, and Canada won. But then the other teams from all over the British Empire said, well, that's not your issue weapon. So Sam Hughes said, yes, it is now. It's our issue weapon. So we used it until 1916. And we used it at the great battles of the Somme, and it wasn't just used like this, it was used with the bayonet. This is a Ross rifle bayonet, and there's the sound of the bayonet clicking on a rifle. You use it at the Somme, soldiers going over the top in human waves, and also being attacked by the Germans. The only trouble is, after 5 rounds of rapid fire, the weapon jams.
Useless.
Pretty much. We eventually ended up using it in no man's land as a picket for barbed wire.
That's all it was good for.
This
resulted in the loss of how many of our men as a result of not having a weapon to use?
In the 2nd Canadian Mounted Rifles, we lost over half of our soldiers in the battles of 1916. Finally, we got a new corps commander. Not all of the British generals were incompetent. General Byng was actually quite competent. He actually came to our regiment and asked us about the rifle, and I think we gave him a full and frank viewpoint of it. And it was very
That's soldier jargon for both barrels, is that right?
Pretty much. And then it was very shortly afterwards removed and replaced with the Lee Enfield, which was a much better bolt-action rifle for the mud of Flanders.
The battles that we remember from the early stages, the Somme, that was where poison gas was used for the
It
first
was
time.
actually just before that was in 1915 at Ypres. We have poison gas used in the first contingent, which they had some officers in it who were chemists. They saw the wave of chlorine gas coming. They identified it as chlorine gas, ran up and down the lines, and yelled at the men to get out their handkerchiefs and urinate on them and hold them over their faces. And these officers just totally risked their lives to do that. The chlorine gas rolled over. The soldiers breathed through their damp handkerchiefs and lived. And the Germans came on.
Something in the urine reacted with the chlorine and neutralized it?
Neutralized it. Some sort of, I'm not a chemist, so I can't tell you what happened. But then the Germans were very surprised to find the Canadians still in their trenches. However, the fighting went on fiercely for several weeks, and over half the 1st Canadian contingent died while they were using this Ross rifle as well. So by Somme, though, we've got the 2nd and 3rd contingent still using the Ross rifle. By the end of the Somme, we've gotten rid of that weapon. And then finally, Byng has asked the Canadian Corps now, he wants ideas. He's going to ask every soldier in the Corps, right down to the private level, really, we don't know how to break through this trench deadlock. Do you have any ideas? He doesn't want a single soldier to go home and say he had an idea and he wasn't listened to. So then we get the Battle of Vimy. Vimy, which has been fought over since 1914, 100,000 French and British soldiers killed and wounded, failing to take it. By the fall of 1916, the Canadian Corps is developing a reputation as shock troops. Even in human wave assaults, we're taking the objectives and starting to innovate. So for 1917, for Vimy Ridge, we do every innovation possible. We take aerial photographs, we make a full mock-up scale, full-scale models of the attack. Every single soldier is drilled in the attack for 2 months. We've got a new rifle. Actually, the leader of my particular, the 2nd Canadian Mounted Rifle, Whiz-Bang Johnson, suggested that they saw off the rifle barrel to 18 inches to make it better for launching rifle grenades. The Canadian Corps reorganizes to small sort of fighting teams called platoons with sections in them, a section of Lewis gunners, a section of bombers with hand grenades, they're called bombers, a section of rifle grenadiers, and a section of actual riflemen. So these are small teams. They're not going to go away as a human assault anymore. It's going to be a small team. So Vimy Ridge, a great success. 2 soldiers actually from our regiment were captured in the raids beforehand, and they kept their mouth shut. The records we've got.
But that was the downside of consulting everybody, because everybody would know the plan. If anyone was captured, they might cough it up.
But you had to trust your soldiers. And Byng trusted the Canadian soldier, the intelligence of the average soldier. And the Germans actually thought they were rather intelligent and rather stupid because they didn't seem to know anything.
That's the rule. If captured, appear stupid.
Play dumb is probably the safest way to go. Now, unfortunately, Haig still had another throw at the human wave assault.
They called him the Butcher.
Yeah.
It's just pure, stupid face
Yeah.
into the bullets.
Fall of 1917, Passchendaele, it's like he hasn't learned anything, and that's where we have George Perks, who had started as a trooper of this regiment. He's now a Major Perks. He crosses 1,000 meters of swampland, seizes a farm, and manages to hold it. Just incredible heroism. Starts out with 100 men, and he's left with 18. Hundreds of men are fed to him as reinforcements. He's still basically left with 18 finally, because just the horrendous conditions, just trenches and craters just filled with mud. So you have Passchendaele, 1917. The Canadian Corps is used, first they use British troops, then they use Australian troops, and the Canadians see as the final objective. Why? Because they knew we could do it. Finally, it isn't until 1918 the British High Command starts to use the Canadian techniques, and not just Canadian, Australians are developing them as well. The Battle of Amiens, August 8th, 1918, we use tanks, we use aircraft, we rehearse the troops, we use surprise, we select dry ground that isn't full of shell craters and mud, and we break through the German lines, tremendous breakthrough, 10-mile penetration. The German High Command, General Ludendorff says, we can't win the war. It's the Black Day. We have lost. He asks the German government to start negotiating
Sue for peace.
Peace of some sort. Now, the Canadian troops on the ground for the next 100 days are pushing the Germans back. We have another Victoria Cross, one in the regiment, Captain Jock McGregor. His company is pinned down by rifle fire. Went up in machine gun fire, a machine gun nest of about 12 Germans and several machine guns. He picks up a rifle, and he goes across 300 meters of open ground, gets to the German machine gun nest, bayonets, kills 4 of them, and the other 8 surrender. It's just an incredible act of heroism. Then the war finally...
Where's McGregor from? Is he from...
Campbell River.
Yeah.
And he was a building contractor. And after the war, people there didn't even know he'd been in the Army. World War II, he joins up as a private, but they take him out of the line and find out he was an officer in the Victoria Cross, and he ends up in command of Camp Wainwright in Alberta for the rest of World War II, which isn't probably the fate he wanted. And same with George Perks. George Perks takes a division overseas, but gets removed from camp command because he's just too old. So these guys are real war horses. And even Whiz-Bang Johnson, in his war diary, he's writing, there, so November 11th, they've taken in Mons, great victory parades, but he realizes, and a lot of his men realize, that if they'd pushed the Germans for another 3 months, they would have won a clear-cut victory. And these are the veterans of World War I saying we wanted a clear-cut victory, and they didn't get it. They got an armistice, which could be, and it was on French soil, so that later on in the 1930s, you have politicians like Adolf Hitler that can say that Germany really wasn't defeated in battle. But the actual veterans at the time say they beat them.
I'm going to take a break here, come back in just a moment, because what happens after the war with this new reputation of Canadians in just 2 minutes. Welcome back to Okanagan and Pioneers in Places. Mike Roberts is talking with Howard Hisdahl, the official historian of the Okanagan Military Museum. This is a wonderful presentation frame. The man in it, Lieutenant Colonel Barber. All of those are medals he received in the First World War.
Most of the First World War and some are for the Second. He was a real war horse. He tried to get overseas for World War II, but eventually he seems to have been sent back because he was overage. But what you'll see is this cross, the first one,
yeah.
And that is a military cross, and it's got a bar on it, which means he won it twice. And
he served from 1914 right through to the end of the war, 1918.
Yes, he has a distinguished, he has a battle star here, actually the Mons Star, which was given to soldiers who served in 1914, 1915. Over half of them were killed and wounded, so very few of them lived to get that battle star. That campaign star. He also won a Distinguished Conduct Medal, and he won the Military Cross, like I said, twice. Now, he came back to the farm, back to the orchard, back to the ranch, living here in the Okanagan Valley.
How did he cope with the memories of what he had gone through?
Well, in those days, if you showed what we would call post-traumatic stress syndrome, especially if you showed it in
battle fatigue.
Battle fatigue. If that happened over there, they would basically give you a court-martial and tie you to a chair and shoot you at dawn. 25 Canadian soldiers were executed during World War I as a result of British court-martials. So you had to really hide any fear that you had. When he came back here, if anybody showed fear, even in those days with our standards of what we considered manhood, there was no therapy. There was no psychiatric
help or psychological testing?
No support, no counseling, no support. So really the veterans were back to their own veterans associations, like we found the Whiz-Bang associations, the actual veterans who
the precursor of the Legion? Sort of.
Yeah, and there's about 18 different veterans organizations finally solidifying about 1926 into the Royal Canadian Legion. But they keep individual regimental associations as well. But it seems with Barber and a number of the senior officers of the unit in the 1920s, and you have there the officers' mess ledger from 1925, the drinking, the alcohol seems to have been their primary source of therapy, and it's just utterly amazing.
So on every day that he'd come into the mess, he would be on the 16th. He'd have 36 beer.
He may have hopefully bought for other people. I'm hoping he treated people, but then I look down the rest of the list.
The 17th, 8 beer. The 18th, 8 beer. The 19th, 4 scotches. The 20th, 6 beers, 6 scotch.
Yes.
Alcohol was the only way to calm the demons that he was reliving from the war.
Alcohol and the comradeship of the other soldiers who'd share that experience.
I said that the Whiz-Bangs was sort of the precursor to the Legion. If you were a Whiz-Bang, nobody else could be a Whiz-Bang except
for veterans of the trenches of World War I. And they held, they closed membership up until even after a little bit after World War II. They finally opened it up. But it was the feeling that nobody else could share this experience. It was a unique experience, and they couldn't really explain it. A lot of World War I veterans, the families, they just didn't talk about it to their families. The only people they could talk to about it was the fellow soldiers. So the regiment's reformed. British Columbia Dragoons actually becomes British Columbia Dragoons in 1929 because they want to get rid of that rifle.
Yeah, they don't want to be in the trenches ever again.
Rifle is too close to the infantry. They do not want to be in the trenches ever again. They want to get in cavalry and maybe even in armored vehicles. Of course, we don't have tanks until Canada doesn't get tanks until the 1930s, and of course, the British Columbia Dragoons don't get tanks until about 1941 or so. But They know they don't want to be infantrymen, so hence the name change in 1929. And back, so what they did in the 1920s and 30s, what they called real soldiering, back to the horses, the cavalry, although they know that the horses are really useless in warfare now.
It's not going to be a part of a future war, but they stay together and they train in that fashion.
They train as best they can with what they have, and what they have is the horses. They have the rifles and the.
And Vernon Camp continues, slightly abated from the 1914-15 days, but it's going to revive.
Yeah, Vernon Camp continues on with the support of the mayor and city council of Vernon, who give the military quite a bit of support.
And by the late 30s, the Vernon Army Camp is again the scene of preparations for war. And this film, this is an amazing film to have of maneuvers.
It's unique, having horses and color photograph. You'll notice there's some vehicles in here. The officers and the men are bringing in their own trucks and vehicles to try and learn how to work in motorized warfare. So they are trying to innovate, even without the funding.
Let's again emphasize that 6,000 men from the Okanagan went overseas, and half of them were dead within the first 2 years.
Pretty much.
1914 to 1916.
67% chance of being killed or wounded in World War I.
And this was a small community. These communities in the Okanagan, there were, what, 20,000 people here in total, maybe?
A couple thousand people in Vernon and a couple thousand in Kelowna. It's a very small community. That's why you get the monuments being erected everywhere with hundreds, really hundreds of names on them. This was a colossal, devastating, catastrophic experience. It would be like 747s full of passengers slamming into mountainsides every 20 minutes. It is just horrendous.
And obviously, it had its effect on the valley. I mean, the population was decimated. All of the best brains were gone. All of the best bodies were gone.
You lost a lot of creativity and talent, tremendous amounts. We know that Nobel Prize winners were killed in World War I in the trenches. It was a tremendous loss of creativity and talent. It was just absolutely horrendous. The casualties, this unit, the 2nd Canadian Mounted Rifles lost 730 men killed and 2,200 wounded and basically scarred for life, physically and mentally. So the repercussions went year after year. It just didn't stop at the end of the war.
And that's why it's so important to have the Okanagan Military Museum here to say, this was our commitment, this was the price we paid, this is the Okanagan history delayed, isn't it? It's our future delayed.
It's part of our heritage, and we should be proud of it.
Howard Hisdahl, thank you very much for being here to start the ball rolling on Pioneers and Places talking about our military history. And I encourage everybody to head over to the Kelowna Memorial Arena, still a great name for that facility, and to go into the Military Museum. It's 4 rooms and an archive that is just filled with the blood of the young men of the Okanagan from the 1914-1920 era. Back next time with more stories from the Okanagan.